Ladies and gentlemen, right now you might be facing uncertainty. Maybe it's in your career, your finances, your relationships, or even your health. You're looking at your situation and nothing seems clear. The future feels like a storm cloud and you're stuck wondering what's next. But let me tell you something. This is not the time to shrink back in fear. This is the time to step up in faith. Uncertainty is something that every person faces at some point in life. It comes in different forms: unexpected job loss, financial struggles, health issues, or moments when the future seems completely unpredictable. In these times, the natural response is fear, anxiety, or even frustration. But what if uncertainty wasn't meant to break you, but to build you? What if, instead of seeing uncertainty as something to avoid, you could see it as an opportunity for your faith to grow stronger than ever before? Faith doesn't develop in the absence of challenges, it grows in the midst of them. Think about a muscle. If you never push it beyond its comfort zone, it never gets stronger. The same is true for faith. If everything in life was predictable and easy, there would be no reason to trust God. It's in the moments of uncertainty that faith is tested, refined, and ultimately strengthened. These are the times when trust in God must go beyond words and become action. Throughout history, some of the most powerful transformations have happened when people faced the unknown and chose to trust God. Look at Abraham. He was called to leave everything he knew and step into a land that God would show him. He had no roadmap, no guarantees, just a promise from God. It was in the uncertainty that his faith grew. Or think about Moses, standing at the edge of the Red Sea with the Egyptian army closing in. The situation looked impossible, but his faith allowed him to trust that God would make a way, and he did. Uncertainty strips away the illusion of control. People like to think they have everything figured out, that they can plan for every possible outcome. But the truth is, life is unpredictable. When things go off course, it forces a choice. Either fall into fear or lean into faith. God doesn't promise a life without challenges, but he does promise to be present in every situation. He doesn't leave his people wandering without direction. Instead, he uses uncertain times to refine, to teach, and to strengthen their trust in him. Consider a seed buried in the soil. In that dark, hidden place, it looks like nothing is happening, but under the surface, transformation is taking place. Roots are growing deeper, strength is developing, and in time, that seed will push through the soil into the light. Faith operates the same way. In seasons of uncertainty, it may feel like nothing is happening, like prayers are unanswered, like God is silent. But just because you can't see progress doesn't mean it's not happening. God is at work behind the scenes, growing something stronger within you. Uncertainty also reveals what the foundation of faith is built on. It's easy to trust God when everything is going well. But what happens when things don't go according to plan? That's when faith is truly tested. Shaky foundations crumble under pressure, but strong faith stands firm. When God allows seasons of uncertainty, he isn't punishing or abandoning his people. He's teaching them to trust him at a deeper level. Faith requires stepping out even when the path isn't clear. It's about believing that God is who he says he is, and that his promises are true, even when circumstances seem to say otherwise. It's about choosing to see uncertainty not as a threat, but as an opportunity to trust God more completely. Every person who has walked by faith has faced moments where they had to make a decision: trust God or be overwhelmed by fear. Those who chose faith saw miracles unfold, doors open, and lives transformed. God doesn't ask for perfect faith. He simply asks for willingness. Willingness to trust him beyond what is seen, to hold on to his promises even in the darkest moments. Faith is a journey, not a destination, and every challenge along the way is a chance to grow stronger, to dig deeper, and to experience God's presence in a powerful way. Fear is one of the most powerful forces that holds people back from experiencing the fullness of what God has planned for them. It paralyzes, keeping people trapped in hesitation, doubt, and anxiety. When faced with uncertainty, fear often becomes the first response. It whispers thoughts of failure, rejection, and worst-case scenarios. It makes the unknown seem terrifying, convincing people that they need to control everything around them. But fear is a liar, and it has only one goal: to keep people stuck. Trusting God, on the other hand, leads to action. It doesn't mean that all the answers are known or that there is never uncertainty, but it does mean stepping forward despite the fear. Trust is a choice. It is deciding to believe in God's promises more than the doubts that creep in. It is choosing faith over worry, confidence over hesitation, and action over stagnation. Trusting God doesn't remove obstacles, but it gives the strength to walk through them. Fear is like chains binding people to their past experiences, mistakes, or even the fear of failure itself. It creates excuses, reasons why something can't be done, why the timing isn't right, why it's safer to stay where it's comfortable. But comfort zones are the enemy of growth. If a person never steps beyond their comfort zone, they never experience the power of what God can do. Peter would have never walked on water if he hadn't stepped out of the boat. He didn't wait for the storm to stop before he moved first, trusting that Jesus would sustain him. That's what faith in action looks like. Trusting God means surrendering the need to control everything. The truth is, no one is ever really in control. People make plans, set goals, and map out their lives, but unexpected situations still arise. Jobs are lost, relationships end, sickness comes, and uncertainty is always present. But for those who trust God, these moments are not the end of the story. Instead of panicking, they stand firm in the belief that God is already working behind the scenes. He sees the full picture when only a small part is visible. Fear distorts reality. It magnifies problems and makes them seem impossible to overcome. But faith shifts the perspective. It reminds that God is bigger than any challenge. It doesn't mean difficulties disappear, but it does mean they are faced with a different mindset. Fear looks at obstacles and sees defeat, but trust looks at obstacles and sees opportunities for God to show his power. One of the biggest reasons people hesitate to trust God is because they fear the unknown. They want certainty, guarantees, and immediate results. But faith doesn't work that way. Faith requires stepping forward before the full picture is revealed. It means believing in God's plan, even when it doesn't make sense. Every great move of God throughout history started with someone who was willing to trust before they could see the outcome. Abraham, Moses, David, and countless others had to act in faith before they saw the results. Trusting God is not about ignoring fear, but about not allowing it to dictate decisions. Courage is not the absence of fear. It's moving forward in spite of it. Every time a step of faith is taken, fear loses its power. The enemy thrives on fear because it keeps people from walking in the destiny God has for them. But when trust in God is greater than the fear of failure, incredible things happen. God has not given a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. That means that fear does not come from him. Fear is designed to make people shrink back, but faith is designed to make them rise up. When God calls someone to something greater, fear will always try to stand in the way. But those who trust him know that his plans are good, his promises are true, and he will never lead them where his grace cannot sustain them. God's plan is always bigger than our understanding. As human beings, we naturally try to figure things out. We analyze, plan, and attempt to predict outcomes. But no matter how much knowledge we have, our understanding is limited. We see only a small piece of the puzzle, while God sees the entire picture. His ways are higher, his thoughts are beyond ours, and his purpose stretches far beyond what we can comprehend. Many times, life does not go according to our plans. Doors close, opportunities disappear, and challenges arise that we never expected. It can be frustrating, even discouraging, when things don't work out the way we envisioned. But what if those disappointments were actually divine redirections? What if what looked like failure was actually a setup for something greater? The Bible is filled with stories of people who faced situations that didn't make sense at the time, yet God was working behind the scenes in ways they couldn't see. Joseph had dreams of leadership and greatness, but instead of stepping into success, he was betrayed by his own brothers, sold into slavery, and later thrown into prison. From a human perspective, it looked like his life was falling apart, but God's plan was at work the entire time. Every setback was positioning him for the moment when he would rise to power and save an entire nation. What seemed like a detour was actually the path to his destiny. Moses grew up in Pharaoh's palace, yet he found himself in the wilderness for 40 years before stepping into his calling. He probably questioned why things happened the way they did, but while he was tending sheep, God was preparing him to lead an entire nation. What looked like wasted time was actually a season of preparation. God's plan was unfolding in ways Moses couldn't yet understand. When Jesus was crucified, his followers were devastated. They had believed he was the Messiah, but now he was gone. Their hope seemed shattered. But what they didn't realize was that the greatest victory was happening in that very moment. What looked like defeat was actually the fulfillment of God's ultimate plan for salvation. 3 days later, what seemed impossible became reality as Jesus rose from the dead. God's plan often doesn't make sense in the moment. It requires faith to trust that he knows what he's doing. Sometimes he removes things from our lives that we thought we needed. Sometimes he allows us to walk through difficult seasons that we don't understand. But every moment is part of a bigger picture, a greater story that he is writing. There are times when we pray for something and God's answer is different from what we expected. It's easy to get discouraged when things don't go our way, but that's when trust must take over. If we only trust God when we understand what he's doing, then our faith is limited. True faith is believing even when nothing makes sense. It's knowing that God's wisdom far exceeds our own. God is never in a hurry and he never makes mistakes. His timing is perfect and his plans are always for our good. Even when we face setbacks, even when doors close, even when things feel uncertain, he is still in control. What we see as obstacles, he sees as opportunities. What we call delays, he calls divine timing. What we view as disappointments, he transforms into something greater than we ever imagined. Every challenge, every waiting season, every unexpected turn is shaping us for what's ahead. Trusting God's plan means surrendering the need to understand everything and instead believing that he is leading us exactly where we need to be. He sees beyond what we can see, and his purpose is always greater than anything we could plan for ourselves. Faith is tested the most in seasons of waiting, when prayers seem unanswered, when circumstances feel unchanging, and when the future remains unclear. It is in these moments that trust in God is truly refined. Waiting is not easy. Human nature desires quick resolutions, instant breakthroughs, and immediate results. Yet God often allows seasons of waiting to shape, strengthen, and prepare his people for something greater than they could ever anticipate. In the Bible, some of the greatest men and women of faith experienced long periods of waiting before they saw the fulfillment of God's promises. Abraham was given a promise that he would become the father of many nations, yet he had to wait decades before Isaac was born. During that time, he had moments of doubt, moments when he tried to take matters into his own hands, but ultimately he had to learn to trust in God's perfect timing. The delay was not denial, it was a time of preparation, a period where God was building his faith, deepening his dependence, and proving that his word would always come to pass. Joseph had dreams of greatness, but his journey to fulfillment was filled with years of waiting. He was betrayed, sold into slavery, and thrown into prison for a crime he didn't commit. Every step seemed to take him further away from the vision God had given him. Yet during those years, God was refining his character, teaching him humility and positioning him for the moment when he would rise to second in command over Egypt. The waiting was not wasted. It was a time of development, a necessary process to prepare him for the responsibility he would one day carry. David was anointed king as a young shepherd boy, but he did not immediately step into his destiny. Instead, he spent years running for his life, hiding in caves and facing relentless opposition from King Saul. It would have been easy for him to question the timing of God's plan. But through the waiting, David learned to trust, to seek God's guidance, and to develop the heart of a true leader. The waiting season was not a delay in his calling, it was an essential part of his preparation. When God makes a promise, he never forgets it. But he also doesn't operate on human timelines. His ways are higher, his thoughts are beyond comprehension, and his timing is always perfect. Sometimes the waiting is necessary because we are not yet ready for what he has in store. Other times the delay is to align circumstances, to prepare the right people, and to orchestrate divine connections that will bring his plan to fulfillment. Waiting requires trust. It requires surrendering the desire for control and believing that God knows exactly what he is doing. It means resisting the urge to force things to happen and instead choosing to rest in his faithfulness. The enemy often uses waiting seasons to plant seeds of doubt, discouragement, and impatience. He whispers lies that say, God has forgotten, that the promise will never change, that things will never change. But faith says otherwise. Faith holds on when circumstances don't align with the promise. Faith declares that God is working even when nothing is visible. Faith chooses to praise in the waiting, to keep walking forward, and to remain steadfast in belief. Every person who has walked in faith has faced moments where they had to wait. Some waited for healing, some for direction, some for breakthrough, and some for restoration. But in every case, God was faithful. He never abandoned them, never ignored their prayers, and never failed to fulfill his word. The waiting season is not punishment. It is preparation. It is a time to grow, to deepen reliance on God, and to trust that his plan is unfolding exactly as it should. Fear is one of the greatest barriers to fully trusting God. It creeps in during moments of uncertainty, whispers doubts when things don't go as planned, and paralyzes faith when circumstances seem overwhelming. Fear convinces people that they are alone, that they are not strong enough, and that the future is something to be anxious about. But fear is a liar. It is not from God. Scripture tells us over and over again, do not fear, because God knows that fear can hold people back from stepping into the fullness of his promises. When Peter stepped out of the boat to walk on water, he did something extraordinary. In that moment, he fixed his eyes on Jesus and defied the laws of nature. But the moment he allowed fear to take over, the wind and the waves became more real to him than the power of Christ. He began to sink, not because Jesus had left him, but because fear made him doubt what was possible. The same is true in life. When fear is given power, faith begins to weaken. When circumstances become the focus instead of God's promises, the heart starts to sink into worry and discouragement. Fear often disguises itself as caution, as logic, as a way of thinking that says, what if this doesn't work out? What if I fail? What if things get worse? But faith requires stepping forward even when the outcome is uncertain. God never calls his people to live in fear. He calls them to walk in faith, knowing that he is in control no matter how things appear. Every person who has ever done something great for God had to face fear. Moses feared that he wasn't capable of leading the Israelites, yet God used him to part the Red Sea. Joshua was afraid of stepping into leadership after Moses, yet God told him, be strong and courageous. Gideon saw himself as the least in his family, yet God called him a mighty warrior. Fear never stops God's plan, but it can stop a person from stepping into it if they allow it to control them. Fear is rooted in a lack of trust. When the future feels uncertain, the mind tries to take control. It wants answers, clarity, and a guarantee of security. But faith is about trusting in God's character, not just in the circumstances. Faith believes that even when things look impossible, God is still working. It believes that God's power is greater than the problem, that his provision is greater than the lack, and that his guidance is greater than the confusion. There are moments when fear will rise, but it does not have to win. Faith is a choice. It is a daily decision to believe that God is bigger than the situation. It is a refusal to let emotions dictate actions. When fear tries to take over, the response must be to stand firm on God's word, to declare his promises, and to keep moving forward. Fear wants to stop progress, to delay destiny, and to keep people stuck in cycles of worry. But trust in God breaks those chains. God has never been afraid. He has never looked at a situation and been unsure of what to do. He has never faced a challenge that was too big for him. And because his spirit lives in those who trust him, fear has no place. Walking in faith does not mean the absence of fear, but it does mean refusing to bow to it. It means choosing to trust even when trust is difficult. It means taking the next step even when the path ahead is unclear. Fear is an illusion that fades in the presence of faith. It cannot stand against the truth of God's promises. Peace is not the absence of trouble, it is the presence of trust in the midst of it. The world teaches that peace comes when everything is going well, when there are no challenges, no uncertainties, no conflicts. But the peace that God gives is different. It is a peace that surpasses understanding, a peace that is unshaken by circumstances, a peace that remains even when storms rage all around. This kind of peace is not found in people, possessions, or perfect conditions. It is found in trusting God completely. Jesus said, "My peace I give to you, not as the world gives." The world offers temporary relief, distractions, and surface-level comfort, but God offers something deeper. His peace is steady, unmovable, and secure. It is not based on what is happening externally, but on the unchanging truth of who he is. When the mind is focused on him, when the heart is surrendered to him, his peace floods the soul. That is why Isaiah 26:03 says, "You will keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on you because he trusts in you." Trust and peace go hand in hand. The more trust in God, the more peace will follow. The less trust, the more anxiety, worry, and fear take over. The disciples experienced this truth firsthand. One night, they were in a boat with Jesus when a violent storm arose. The waves crashed, the wind howled, and fear gripped their hearts. But where was Jesus? He was asleep. While they panicked, he rested. They woke him up, crying out in fear, and his response was simple. "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" Then he spoke to the storm, and instantly there was calm. The lesson was clear. When Jesus is in the boat, there is no need to fear. When trust in him is firm, peace is present, no matter how fierce the storm may be. Many people live in a constant state of stress and worry because they are trying to control things that only God can handle. They carry burdens they were never meant to bear, replaying worst-case scenarios in their minds, feeling overwhelmed by uncertainty. But trust releases that weight. It places everything into God's hands, believing that He is sovereign, that He is working all things together for good, that He has already gone before and made a way. Worry does not change anything, but trust changes everything. Paul understood this well. He wrote about peace not from a place of comfort, but from a prison cell. He had every reason to be anxious. His future was uncertain. His freedom was taken. His life was at risk. Yet, he said, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. Peace comes when prayer replaces panic, when gratitude replaces grumbling, when trust replaces turmoil. God's peace is not just a feeling, it is a position. It is a firm stance in faith that refuses to be shaken by what is seen. It is knowing deep in the soul that no matter what happens, God is in control. It does not mean that troubles disappear, but it does mean that troubles no longer have power to steal joy, to create doubt, or to disrupt confidence in Him. Walking in peace is a choice. It requires a decision to trust, to surrender, to focus on God rather than on the problems. It is not something that happens automatically. It must be pursued, cultivated, and protected. When thoughts of fear arise, they must be replaced with truth. When anxiety tries to creep in, it must be countered with faith. Peace is not found in perfect circumstances. It is found in a heart fully resting in the one who holds all things together.